All right. Well, welcome to our first Cleaver conversation. And today we have with us author and coach Dave Stitt. And we're going to be discussing the topic of delegation, but we're going to be using Dave's book, Deep and Deliberate Delegation, as sort of our springboard. So when we were going through our delegation campaign this month, one of the things we like to do is look for additional resources. And really, his book was one of the best books I could find that was both really good, but it was also modern. It was written for today's business environment with cross domain teaming and situations where delegation isn't always as clear cut and difficult because of organizational dynamics. And think you call it splintering or fragmenting in the book. I can't, something like that, but we'll get into that. But that's the introduction. So Dave, and then we've got the rest of the Cleaver team here, which they'll be chiming in on the conversation as we go. But we'll get started just talking to Dave. So Dave, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe your client base a little bit, just to sort of orient people on where you're coming from.
My name is Dave. I've been in the construction industry for 48 years. I left school at 16, which makes me 64. I didn't do very well at school. My wife, who's a dyslexia specialist, says that if I was at school now, I'd be on a high dose of Ritalin. I haven't got the labels officially, but I am dyslexic, and I'm probably ADHD as well. I spent most of my time at school stood outside the headmaster's class, having been thrown out of the class, headmaster's door, having been thrown out of the class for being disruptive. And I'm still disruptive now. I can't help it. I left school at 16. I was playing golf with a guy one day, literally a week after I left school. And he said to me, what are you doing for a career, Dave? And I said, no idea. I've just left school. And he said, well, how do you fancy being a trainee civil engineer? And I said, well, what's one of them? And he said, well, it's noisy, it's dirty, you build things, you get to see the world, you don't get paid very much. It's great fun, come along and have a look. And the girl I was going out with at the time, her mother was a careers teacher in a school. And so I had a chat with her. I said, what's a civil engineer? She said, oh, Dave, it's a wonderful job, go for it. So 20 years later, I'm married to this girl, and this is my mother-in-law. And I said to her, so what's a civil engineer? She said, Dave, I've got no idea. So I fell into a job at 16 without any qualifications. And I just kind of woke up. I realized, gosh, if I'm going to get anywhere, I'm going to have to start working, studying and working. So I left school thinking I'm never going to take an exam ever again. And 48 years later, I'm still taking exams and thriving on it. So I went from that pretty junior job to, I was there for about a year, and then I got another job, and I was thrown in at the deep end. The guy who took me on because I played golf. And so he put me on a building site and said, that's your section over there, get on with it. So at 17, I made loads of mistakes, but I tried really hard and worked really hard. And so he kind of took me under his wing. And as he went up the organization, so did I. And then about 15 years later, I was headhunted for another organization. This is a construction contractor organization, which was really aggressive. They were hard on their clients, hard on their suppliers, even harder on their own staff. And they realized that they couldn't continue like that. So they initiated in the mid-90s an organizational transformation program, which I was kind of young and naive, and I still am. And I was really up for it. And I found myself at the front of it on what was called their Coaching the Coaches program. The idea being that if they could train up a dozen or so people inside of the business to be internal coaches, we would keep the movement, the transformation going when the external coaches left. So that's kind of how it worked out. I was first introduced to coaching when I was probably about 35, mid-90s, and it changed my life. I became less interested in bricks and blocks and concrete, technical stuff, and more interested in people, and particularly teams. I continued with that organization for another few years, and I was headhunted again into an operational role. And then they found out that I had this, the chief exec found out I had this kind of change coaching experience. And he kind of told me I was, from this point onwards, you're leading our transformation program, Dave. So for 2 years, I had a dedicated team of about 15 people. We invested heavily in it, 2,500 staff. All of those staff were involved in it. And I was kind of at the front of it, leading it. It was really quite successful. I would say we got into the bloodstream to about 30 or 40%. But even at that low level, it really did change the organization. It really did. And their bottom line and their top line. And so after 2 years, we actually agreed, myself, the board agreed that this was no longer an initiative. This is kind of how we do the business. So we put my team back into operational roles, and they all got promoted in the process. Then the question was, well, what we're going to do with you, Dave? And so the chief exec wanted me on the main board. I refused to relocate to London, which is about three hours away from where I live in the northeast of England. And so after about 6 months, out of sheer frustration, he said to me, well, what do you want to do, Dave? And I said, well, I'd really like to do is what I've been doing here, but for the wider industry, those who are prepared to pay me for it. And he said, how can we help you do that? And I said, make me redundant, please. And he said, it's not going to happen. We're kind of industry renowned for having, transformed, and we're not going to make you, the guy who led the program, redundant. So the conversation went on for another month or so. I was almost on hospital leave, working from home because they couldn't decide what to do with me. And then one day I got called down to London and they made me redundant, which was a shock, I got to tell you. So that was about 23 years ago. And to be honest, I've not stopped since. So nowadays, well, for all that time, I've been a leadership team coach in the construction industry, working with boards of directors of big construction companies or the leaders of UK strategic projects, some of the biggest projects in the UK, some of the biggest projects in Europe. So I work with the top 6 or 7 people right at the top. And my principle is, there's an old Norwegian saying that the fish rots from the head. So if the head of the project or if the head of the business is rotten, then the rest of it's going to be rotten pretty quickly. So if I can get the board of directors or the project principals pointing in the same direction, working together, giving out consistent leadership, then that also cascades through the organization, and it really works. So as I say, I've been doing this for 20 odd years. That's where 95% of my revenues come from. And I usually work for 2 or 3 or 4 teams at the same time. And I usually work with them for 2 or 3 years. I've worked with boards of directors for 5 years, to enable them to deliver their 5-year vision. But most of the projects I work on are kind of several hundred million, sometimes billion. And they usually last 5 years or so. So I'm kind of with them usually from start to finish, or when it goes belly up to finish. So that's what I do. And Todd, you also asked me to touch on my client base. Well, my client base, usually construction contractors. Most of the big projects in the UK are usually delivered by joint ventures between 3 or 4 organizations to spread the risk. So I usually get involved with the joint venture board or the joint venture executive. And so there's a lot of coming together on culture, because these organizations don't share the same culture, they don't share the same drivers, and they don't talk about it. They just think that if we all get together and kind of go for it, it'll work out. Rarely it does. Rarely it does. So I get them talking together about their culture. I get them talking about how you're going to create an environment where everyone can come and do their best work, because that's when magic happens. So that's my bread and butter work. Along the way, I write some books, and I also create content, but that'll probably come out more in the conversation.
So obviously, the purpose of this call is to discuss delegation in general and kind of around your book, Deep and Deliberate Delegation. But what provoked you to write this book? What were the catalysts? What led to it?
Yeah, I love this question. So I was working with the executive of a global company, UK based, in I think 2015, and so I was coaching the leadership team. And in one of my regular conversations with the top guy, he said to me, "Dave, will you do me a workshop on delegation?" And I said, "No, I'm a coach. I'm not a trainer. There's a big difference." And he went, "Oh, that's disappointing, Dave." He said, "Because the work that you're doing with me and the rest of the executive, as good as it is not as good as it could be." He said, "Because we all think we're the only people who can do this stuff. And we've got, hundreds of employees. Many of them, want to stretch. Many of them want to do more. Many of them, want to grow and develop personally, get up the ladder and what have you. And yet we're disempowering them because we think we're the only people who can do this stuff." And he said, "So as good as the work you're doing with us is, it's not as good as it could be." And I said, "Well, sorry, I'm a coach. I'm not a trainer." And so I left his office, and I got to tell you, in the following fortnight, every conversation I had with business people had delegation in it. Maybe they weren't using the word delegation, but some of them were. But they were saying things like, "Well, if I want to get something done and get it done well, I've got to do it myself." Or, "My people, the middle management guys can't let go. And if they could, that would free up our organization." Or, "You can't get decent staff like you used to be able to get." So in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I was hearing this all the time in every conversation. This guy had opened my ears to delegation. And I thought to myself, whoa, he's onto something. He's onto something. So I sat down, did a bit of research over a couple of days, and I thought, right, this could be really good. So I rang him back. The guy was called Mark. I said, "Mark, it's not a workshop, it's a program." He says, "What do you mean?" I says, "Well, there's too much in there to do a workshop on it. It's a program." He said, "Well, what does it look like?" So I told him, and he went, "Whoa, fantastic. Let's do it, Dave." So I did this program I created in next to no time at all with his top team. And they said, "Right, we've got to roll this out through the business." So I think I ended up over in the course of a year or so, I did about 9 cohorts of the program with their people, including their youngest people, which initially I couldn't understand. But Mark was very keen that young people went through the program as well. I said, "Why? They've got nobody to delegate to." He says, "Yeah, that's the point, Dave. If they understand what decent delegation is and they're not getting it, I want them to push back. I want them to push back on, their boss and the executive. I want this to come ground up as well as top down." And so, I did that along with several other organizations. And after a couple of years, I thought, whoa, there's a book in this. I always wanted to write a book. So I assembled a team, and we got together 2016, 17, and 18, and published the book in, I think, January, February 2018. So that's Todd. That's the story. That's what prompted me.
So the reason we started our campaign and our first Cleaver conversation around this topic is because it's such a universal request and a sense of people are saying, "I don't know how to do this. How do I do it better?" Frank, any thoughts or ideas coming based on just where we're at so far?
Well, thank you, Dave. It's nice to meet you and hear a little bit about your background. Yeah, I think, well, we see it as a common growth area for many of the people we're coaching. I guess as you're writing the book or going through this, I guess my question would be, is there common phenomena you see of the blocks in delegation or some tips to delegate? So just I'd like to hear more from you about that. Certainly I can remark too on some of the stuff we've seen with the Cleaver clients, but I'd love to hear from you first.
Well, tips. I could spend a fortnight sharing tips, and all I would say, Frank, is read the book. In terms of common aspects that block things, well, I can only speak from my experience, and my experience is in the construction industry. Most of the executives I work with right now, and have done for the last 25 years, have kind of got to where they got the same way as I got to where I got. And that was through force of character, hard work, determination, and a mental attitude. Nothing's going to stop me. And that's great. Being a force of nature is great, but it's not kind. And it's not developmental on the people around you. It's flipping hard work, working for a driver, working for a force of nature. And so I got promoted, and then I got promoted, and then I got promoted again because I worked hard, I was determined, and I was big and bold and brash. In the 25 years that I had a proper job before I became a coach, in the 25 years that I had an operational job, nobody had ever taught me how to get along with people. Nobody had ever taught me how to get the best out of people. Nobody had ever taught me how to build a team. And so that's what I come across all the time in my work. Executives are the same as me. They haven't been taught this stuff. And so it's a blind spot for them. It really is. Most things to do with, because they're also technically qualified, they're civil engineers and mechanical engineers, and they think that everything can be engineered, including people, and they can't. And there's a kind of a saying in the UK, there's nought queerer than folk. Us as human beings, we're kind of independent. We have independent minds and we do what we want a lot of the time. And quite often it's not what our boss wants us to do. But because people haven't been kind of educated in how to get the best out of people, how to get the best out of themselves, how to inspire people, and how to build teams, they just go around like a bull in a china shop, commanding and controlling people right, left, and center. Well, it doesn't work. And it's been proven not to work, for the last 50 years. And yet we still dangle carrots and bash people with sticks and expect them to do what we want to do. I come across this all the time. And so that's a common block. Most people are technically focused. Most people are focused on the project or on the business. They're trying to solve problems. They're trying to fight fires. They're rushing around like headless chickens, haven't got time to think, haven't got time to work out what's really, really, really important, even at an executive level. And yet the answer is behind them. They employ 2,000 people, but they're not looking at their people. They're looking at the problem all the time, whether it's a project problem or a business problem. And they're trying to fix it themselves, hero style. So I would say that's the most common thing that I come across. Also, most of the people I work with are white, of a certain age, and are men, just like everybody on here. So we talk a good talk about diversity and inclusion, but it's like, what have we got to do right now to get this job done? What have we got to do right now to get this fire out? So what I'm trying to do with the people I work with is just to slow them down a bit. Just slow down. Let's get together. I'm going to slow you down. Let's talk about what's really important for you as an executive, for the project that you're running, for the business that you're running, and what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to engage your people? And how are you going to cascade a more intelligent way of getting things done through people rather than trying to do everything yourself? So Frank, it's a long answer, but I would say if I could, that's what I commonly come across. Yeah, and I've told that story about 1,000 times and everybody agrees with me.
Dave, what do you think people get wrong about delegation?
I think the biggest mistake is the assumption that it's going to happen. I've just delegated this to you, Graham, and it's going to happen, isn't it? More often than not, it doesn't. So I think people underestimate delegation. There's a fine line between delegation and dumping, where I just dump this task on you, get that done. And we haven't even really interrogated what the task is. So we haven't really got a common understanding of it. So you're going to go off and do what you think I want. You're going to go off and do what you think I want, but that's not what I want at all. And then you're going to come back and say to me, there it is, Dave. Like, no, that's wrong. That's not what I wanted. It's kind of just a task dumping going on all over the place. And so I didn't really want to perpetuate that when I started writing this book. I wanted to kind of get under the skin of it, like find out, try and find out what's really, really going on. And by that time, I'd had like 35 years or more, 40 years in the industry, and I'd made such a mess of this for most of the time that I was a manager and a leader. I had plenty of war stories and plenty of things to look into the mirror, and so I had loads of material to work at. But then I started researching, what was out there, and there wasn't very much. There still isn't very much out there. If you go onto Amazon, look for delegation, there's not much. People just automatically assume because you've got into this position, you're now a manager, well, you must be able to delegate, surely. And we're all thinking everybody, because they've got in their positions, must be able to delegate, but it's something that's never been handled, something's rarely talked about.
What are the different elements that you're introducing that you think are different than sort of what people think of as classical delegation?
So, Todd, you mentioned the word elements. So there are 5 elements to my deep and deliberate delegation approach. So there's 5 elements to this approach that I've kind of created. Todd, I sent you an image of that. Is it easy to put that on the screen, or should I just talk about it?
I'll find it. Go ahead and talk, and I'll look while you're talking.
So the 5 elements are: there's something about me, the delegator. There's something about you, the delegatee. There's something about the thing that's being delegated, whether it's a task or an outcome. And there's something about the system or the environment in which this is happening. And the thing that's in the middle of these 4 elements that kind of acts as a glue to all of it is feedback. So there's something about me, the delegator. There's something about you, the delegatee. There's the thing I'm delegating, the task or the outcome. There's the system in which this is happening, the workplace and the world. And the thing in the middle of all of that is feedback. There's feedback happening all the time. And it's not necessarily verbal feedback. If you think it would be useful, Todd, I could say a few words to each of those 5 elements.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, let's look at me, or you, the delegator, the person who's in charge. There's something about you, there's something about me that's kind of unique. I have this thing which there's a great Canadian program called The Strategic Coach by a guy called Dan Sullivan. Have you ever heard of that? Brilliant program. I was on that program for 6 years. Really, really good program. It's not for salaried people, it's for entrepreneurs. And he has a concept called unique ability. So I'm first of all looking at the box called you, the delegator. So there's something about you. You have a unique ability, according to this Dan Sullivan guy, and I believe him, because I have a unique ability. I've spent time working it out for myself. So there's things that, because of my upbringing, because of my education, because of my interest, my passion, my beliefs, my gifts and my voids and my values, because of the unique combination of that, I'm able to do certain things like the best that nobody else can do, as well as me. So in looking at you, the delegator, what I want you to do is look at, what are you flipping brilliant at? What are you really, really good at? Really good at, uniquely good at. And you probably don't even know what that is. So there's a piece of work to be done on yourself, identifying the thing that you've mastered better than anybody else. And then the idea, and this is kind of a lifetime program, working out what you're best at. But from then on, from now on, I want you to position yourself so you're working to your skills and you delegate the rest. So there are things that you do on a daily basis that you are incompetent at. you shouldn't be doing them. There are things that you do that you're competent at, but you don't like doing. There are things that you do on a daily basis that you're excellent at, but you've got no passion for it. And then there are things that you do that's your unique ability. So the idea is to get closer and closer to your real strength and then delegate the rest. But there's a beautiful saying that Dan Sullivan's got, that Frank Sinatra never shifted pianos. He had nothing to do with the positioning of the piano or the stool. He had nothing to do with getting the audience, bums on seats. He had nothing to do with the lighting or the sound or the engineering. He had nothing to do with any of that. All he would do is turn up and sing his songs. And when he was doing that, he was getting, I don't know, $50,000 a minute. And so that's his unique ability. So this is about you. You have this unique ability. The idea is to work on that, find out what that is, and then start delegating the rest. First of all, the stuff that you're incompetent at. And then secondly, the stuff that you're competent at but don't like doing. And then thirdly, the stuff that you're excellent at, but you've got no passion for it. So you're left playing to your strengths, just like Frank Sinatra. So that's you. So then let's have a look at the delegatee. One of the definitions of delegation is to entrust powers and authority to another person, to entrust. So it's about trust. So when you're delegating to somebody, how do you know if you trust them in relation to the thing that you're delegating to them? Not in general terms, in specific terms. So do you trust them to do this thing you're asking them to do? And so how do you kind of make an objective assessment of that? Well, I've created a thing called the Trustworthy Tracker. And it has 4 columns. There's, does this person care about it? Are they honest? Are they reliable? And are they competent at doing this thing that you want them to do? So there's 4 headings, and down each column, there's 5 levels of grading from pretty good to the top and pretty awful at the bottom. And so you make an assessment of the delegatee in relation to the thing that you're delegating them to. It's very specific. It's not in general terms. In general terms, you might like this person, you might think they're good and friendly and what have you, but to what extent do you trust them to do the thing that you're going to delegate them? There's a maximum score of 135 coming out of this tool. Most people score about 7 or 8 or 10 or 20. And so you can have a look at where they're scoring low. And so you can go into the delegation with your eyes open. They're pretty competent at this thing. They're pretty reliable. And they're pretty honest, but they don't really care for it. Because they don't, it's not their cup of tea. So, it's not what they like doing. So they might be competent in the rest of it, but they don't care about it. So they score 0. So their score, because it's a multiplier across the columns, is 0. So you then ask yourself, well, what have I got to do to overcome that? So you start off by having a straight conversation with the person as to whether or not they care about doing it. You have a conversation with them. Or if they're not as competent as you think they need to be, you have a conversation with them about competency, about this particular thing. And maybe you organize some training for them, or maybe you mentor them for a while. So you're actually walking in to this delegation with your eyes wide open. And the chances are you're not going to have somebody, because most of us have got the people that we've been given. Most of us will find that the person in front of us that we're delegating to is not like Superman. They've got their areas that they need to work on. So you need to work with them on those areas that are scoring low, so that you're managing them. They're carrying out the delegated task or outcome, but under, at close quarters with you. So there's something about you. There's something about the delegatee.
I'm interested to hear, Dave, just how this continues, because like some of the things that I hear, where you're going makes a ton of sense. That, I like the Trustworthy Tracker a lot. I think trying to figure out how to like implement this into your comment earlier about like kind of the pace of life and like delegation's a good idea and we should get good at it, but like figuring out actually where to do that and how to implement some of these things. That's a lot of the times the challenge that I see with the folks we're working with. And I think people struggle with prioritization. I think people struggle with trying to figure out, and I think your grid of thinking through what should I hold on to versus what I should give away is really helpful. But I like kind of the deconstruction of thinking through the process. So I'm interested to hear you continue to explain it.
So Mike, it's great to meet you. So
Likewise.
you touch on a really important point at this stage. This is deep and deliberate delegation. This is designed for significant pieces of delegation. It's not designed for, hey Mike, can you make me a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? It's not for things that normally would appear on your daily to-do list. These are significant pieces of delegation because you just haven't got time for deep and deliberate delegation for everything that needs to get done. Okay, so I just want to make that distinction up front.
That's helpful.
And so I'm next going to come to the box called outcome. So are you delegating tasks or are you delegating deliverables, outcomes? If you're delegating tasks, you're probably going to end up telling the person how to do it and then checking up on them like an officer of the law. You know, we call them policemen. This isn't going to free you up if you're delegating one-off tasks. It's not going to free you up to operate at a higher level. And it's not really going to empower, you know, the people that you're delegating to. My suggestion is you start delegating outcomes. And then you let the person work out how they're going to do it for themselves. And so this takes you into objective setting. And so there's a whole kind of section in the book about how do you set objectives? Do you use the SMART metaphor? I would imagine all you guys have come across SMART. Well, I think SMART is what I would call entry-level objective setting. It's really basic and it's straightforward. And I got to tell you, if I could get people in the UK construction industry just to do SMART, to check whether they've just delegated a SMART, you know, is it specific, is it measurable, et cetera, that would change. It would change the world because they don't even specify, they don't even agree outcomes or tasks to that extent. But really, it is an entry level. And one of the things that I don't like about SMART is specific, measurable, agreed, realistic, timed. I don't like realistic. There's no passion in realistic. There's no stretch in realistic. And that's why I think it's entry level, because deep and deliberate delegation is all about stretching yourself and stretching the person and the people in your organization. Okay, so there's a big chunk on whether you're delegating tasks or outcomes and how you're actually specifying them. Are you using SMART or are you using what I would prefer, which I call courageous goals? And the great question around that is, what would be the equivalent of a gold medal, an Olympic gold medal in relation to this outcome? You know, what would be a really stretching, you know, achievement? And so ask that question for you, what would be the equivalent of an Olympic gold medal in relation to this outcome? So look, there's something about you, there's something about the delegatee, there's something about the outcome. And I think that's actually the most challenging one, the outcome. Because in all the sessions that I've done on this, and I don't know why, but people seem to struggle most with, well, what am I going to delegate? What is the what of delegation? And I can't answer why people struggle with that because it's beyond me. To me, it's easy. You know, work out what you're really good at and then delegate the things you're not very good at and do it at a scale as a deliverable as opposed to an individual task. Anyway, so we now come to the system. So I'm going to be really quick on this one. This is like an introduction to systems thinking. So each and every one of us as a human being, we are a living system made up of skin, blood, heart, lungs, muscle, bones, lots and lots of water. And all of that put together creates us as a system. And if you put 10 of us, 5 of us together and call it a team, that team is a system. It's a higher level system. And that team works within another system called, Cleaver Company, which works in another system called, I don't know, coaching in the United States of America. My work is inside a system called the built environment, the construction industry. And that's inside of another system called UK PLC, which used to be inside of another system called the European Union. It still is really, but we kid ourselves. We think that we've left. And that's inside of another system called the Earth, which is inside of another system called the solar system. We're like nested Russian, the systems, we're a system of subsystems, like nested Russian dolls. And every tier of system above us is messing with us every day. So it's not like, Mike, it's not that you're my boss and you've just delegated something to me. It's not going to be like the rest of the world is going to let me get on with it. There's outside forces acting on this piece of delegation all the time. And the least we can do is have a conversation about, well, what might come left field? What curveball might we get in the next 3 weeks? What might come from the outside that knocks us off track here? So at least let's have a conversation about that and see if we can proactively work something out. Because most of the things that go wrong, we can anticipate them, or a lot of them are. So just going into this thinking, assuming it's going to work out, it's not. You've got to think about the system in which we're working and the systems above that, the environment, the externalities that are going to come to bear. And intellectually, that can be quite taxing for some people because, some people say, well, I'm only going to look after what I can influence. Well, okay, Stoicism is a great philosophy. But sometimes you just got to look at outside of yourself, outside of the team, outside of the organization, what might knock me off course here? And have a grown-up conversation about that with, the person who's delegated this to you. Okay, and then right in the middle, the thing that's holding all this together is feedback. Whether it's you or me, whether it's you, the delegator, or me, the delegatee, we are getting feedback all the time. We're getting feedback from the system around us. We're getting feedback from the actual delegation itself. I'm getting feedback from you, the delegator. You're getting feedback from me. You're looking at me and thinking, well, Dave's not into this. Dave's heart's not in this. I might not be saying that, but you're picking that up. That is feedback. And just because it's not spoken doesn't mean to say it's valid. So there's a lot of unspoken stuff going on all the time, which is right in front of our nose, which we don't even notice. This is feedback. It's happening all the time, continuously. So wake up, open your eyes, open up your senses, your listening, your feel, your touch, kind of move south of your head, your rationale, your logic, and into your body. Because your body has huge intelligence, your gut feel, your instinct, and all that kind of stuff. Whether you're the delegatee or the delegator, become more sensitive to the feedback to the stimuli that's coming at you all the time, and factor that in. So, guys, this is deep and deliberate delegation. You're not going to do this in 5 minutes. You're going to master this over the course of your entire career. Inside the book, there is some tips, some tools to get started. And I think they're really good. And people tell me they're good. So you're going to make a start here to become, let's say, a more effective manager and a more effective leader over time. And I'm not just talking to you guys, I'm talking to your customers as well here. You guys, I guess, because you're in a coaching company, you're in a development company, you're along the road. It's getting you started into a more intelligent way of getting things done through your people rather than rushing around yourself, trying to do everything.
Yeah, Dave, that's super helpful. Thank you for all that. I'd be curious because I think we bump into this a lot with our clients. Curious about, you talk about the systems, when those systems are creating barriers to delegation, whether it's I'm saying that this is your goal or this is how you have to do something and you need to delegate that. And let's say I'm being told I have to delegate this thing, but that's actually the spot that I'm skilled at, passionate about, and love doing, right? When you have those external factors, like what's some of the coaching you give people on how to deal with those external factors in relation to this context?
Austin, that's a flipping great question. Do you, Austin? I'm not going to give you a direct answer on here. I'm just going to give you a roundabout way of sharing with you what I'm thinking about in response to your question. But my first coach said to me 30 years ago, Dave, life is a conversation. And I went, what do you mean by that? And he said to me, Dave, I'm a coach. I don't give answers. Think about it. So I've been thinking about that for the last 30 years. Life is a conversation. And I was talking to an American guy about this, and he says, yeah, it is, Dave. It is, Dave. He said, I heard last week that it's about the conversations you're having and about the conversations you're not having and the way you're having them. And I went, whoa, that is amazing. So I started talking to my supervisor, and I said that to her, and she said, Dave, put it into a formula. Put it into a formula right now. So Austin, look, this is my formula. Your capacity for success equals the conversations you're having minus the conversations you're not having multiplied by the way you're having them. So the way you're conversing with people is a multiplier. So first of all, the conversations you're having. If you're just having technical conversations about itsy bitsy tasks, then that's limiting for you. Now, the conversations you're not having. So you had a conversation last week with John, and he said something that really pissed you off. And you're just thinking to yourself, right, the guy's a git. I'm not going to talk to him ever again. So you don't have conversations with him. That is also a limiting factor. You got to have that. You got to tell them that he upset you or you were upset, etc., etc. So first of all, it's the conversations you're having minus the conversations that you're not having. And then multiplied by the way you're having them, by the way you're conversing. Now, I've got to tell you that most of the management conversations in the Western world, the default format for those conversations is command and control, where people tell us what to do and how to do them. So that's one way of having a conversation. Another way of having a conversation is to use a coaching style where you ask questions and listen and reflect back. So, Austin, it's probably not the answer you were looking for, but it's about your conversations. Life is a conversation, and particularly about the way you're having them. That's going to have the greatest influence on those people who are telling you to do certain things, telling you that you can do that or you can't do that, or the people who are your peers working at the same level that you do not have hierarchical control over, or your suppliers or your clients. It's about the way you have conversations. If you're telling people what to do and how to do it, that's one way. It's not empowering. If you're having a coaching style conversation where you're asking questions, reflecting back and drawing out the best of the other person, whether they're your client or not, that's a more effective way of living this life on this planet, I think.
I'm curious, Dave, like I'm thinking about the diagram we had up earlier and listening to you talk, and like how would you delineate the difference between, I'll call it healthy management and deep and deliberate delegation? Because like when I think there is this, when I listen to you, I'm like, no, this just sounds like good management. And so like, how would you distinguish those two, or maybe they're the same in your mind?
So somebody wrote a testimonial about my book. It goes along the lines of, it's more than delegation, it's a whole business school for management. So Todd asked me a question last week. Dave, what question would you wish somebody had asked you about delegation? I wish 30 years ago, 35 years ago, that somebody had asked me, Dave, what are you delegating and how are you doing it? And that would have stopped me in my tracks because I wouldn't have known how to answer that. And I would have stopped and I would have thought about it and I would have come up with something. and maybe I would have arrived at something 30 years sooner than I did. So I think I don't distinguish between delegation and management. I think it's the most important aspect of management at this moment in time. And it's probably the most neglected aspect of management. And I'm not talking about leadership, because I distinguish between management and leadership. To me, management is about getting stuff done. And I think the most neglected and the most important part of how to get stuff done is to delegate effectively. I think, in answer to your question, I'm not distinguishing between those. I think it's one and the same thing.
And go back real quick, the what and the how of delegation in your book, the spot to go to like really clarify that is what? Like, because if I'm thinking, oh, that's me, like I feel that. Like, so how do I delineate kind of what should I delegate? How do I delegate it?
I think everything in my life starts with me, Dave. Nobody else can really motivate me. So I always start with me. You know, so Mike, I wear a hair shirt. I'm quite prickly with myself. Whenever anything goes wrong, the first person I look at is me. I've cocked it up. Oh, good, I haven't. It wasn't me this time. So to me, everything starts with me. So I would point you to the first chapter of the book, or the first part of the book, which is about you, the delegator. And I would want you to look at yourself seriously, and I would want you to identify your strengths. What is Mike Borst really good at? You know, all modesty to one side, and even ask your colleagues. So Frank, I'm asking you, I'm Mike, what am I really good at in your mind? Get that feedback from your people, and then synthesize that feedback so till you come up with a statement that represents your, you know, what Dan Sullivan would call your unique ability. So my statement is, I simply present what is essentially required to enable people to get to where they want to get to. So I simply present what is essentially required. So I don't go into the far end of we got a saying, a far end of a fart. You know, I keep to the essentials. So that's kind of what, I have this knack of being able to read a load of stuff and then quickly condense it down into the essentials, you know, the core elements. And then I have a knack of being able to communicate that. And so that's what I'm flipping great at. And that's what I'm doing with my life right now. So I'm encouraging you to go and look at yourself and work out for yourself, with the help of your colleagues, what is Mike Borst uniquely able to do for this organization on this planet at this point in time? And then have a look at, well, what are you actually doing on a daily basis? You know, do an activity inventory. You know, set your clock to go off every hour for the next fortnight. And when your little alarm goes off, write down what you're actually doing. So you've got some data. I'm making a cup of tea. I'm putting this document into a brown envelope, and I'm putting a stamp on it for the US postal system. That's what I'm doing at this moment in time. So after 2 weeks, you've got some data. So have a look at that data and categorize it. Things that I'm incompetent at, that I shouldn't be doing. Things that I'm competent, that I don't like doing. Things that I'm excellent at, that I've got no passion for. And things that only I can do around here. And then start to progressively delegate from the bottom up. Delegate the things that you're not very good at, that you're not competent at. You shouldn't even be doing that, Mike. And so if you did nothing else, then look at the front, the first part of that book, because it actually tells you how to do all of that. If you did nothing else other than that, you would start showing up differently. I guarantee it. And so that gets you to the what. What am I going to delegate? The how. Well, you're a smart guy. You can work a lot of that out yourself. But if you want some help, then, you know, read part 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Todd, I've really enjoyed it. And by somehow coincidence, I've sold 15 copies of my book in the United States today. How did that happen?
Well, we believe in win-win.
There you go.
No, I've really enjoyed it, Todd. And if ever you want to welcome me back, or if Frank wants to have a chat, or Austin, or any of the guys,
Yeah.
I'm definitely up for that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure this won't be our last conversation. All
Brilliant.
right. Well,
Okay.
have a good one. I know it's late over there for you, so thanks for your time. And until next time, good luck.
Thanks, Todd. Nice to meet you, Austin.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Dave. Nice to meet you as well.